I really don't have a lot of time to make videos right now, so this is going to have to be the abbreviated version of how to replace the struts on the back side of a 96 Camry. You guys know how to take the wheel off and jack the car up and everything, right? I mean, you take off the hubcap, use your 21 mil to take off the lug nuts, and then you take off your wheel, right? You don't need me for that. So now what we're going to do is spray everything with this magical fluid WD-40. I think right there is the sway bar end link, so we're going to soak that. And then here's the little clip that holds the brake hose in place. And right back here are the strut bolts. You can't really see the bottom one, but you'll just have to trust me. I'm just soaking them real well. And you can see the struts actually blue under all that grime. I think the new ones are black though. So there, part one, soak it with WD-40. Normally when I replace struts, I like to undo the top nuts first, but where are they? Oh, they're behind all that stuff. So in this Camry, there's a little button that you push and that lets you pull down the whole seat, but there's still no nuts yet. What you do have is this little 12mm bolt right down here underneath the, what is that? The part of the seat thing. And you got to take that out, according to other videos I already watched. I'll edit out my ineptitude later. So this looks like I'm really good with wrenches and stuff. Now that I've removed the bolt, all I have to do is slide this panel upward, and it'll come right out. And the bolts for the top of the strut are right in there somewhere. I was really hoping I could get to these bolts, or nuts really. They're nuts on studs. I was hoping I could get to them without removing the whole rear deck, but I can only really see one of them, and I don't have a curved handle ratchet, so let me see what else I can do. Right here there's a Phillips head screw that holds down the deck a little bit, so maybe I can take that out and get a little more access to these nuts. These nuts. Do you really need to watch me undo a Phillips head screw? I guess this is part of the process, right? So I took out a couple more plastic panels, and now I can just barely move the deck lid cover enough to get in there. So of course I'm going to give these a spritz with the WD-40. See those other nuts in there? It's kind of blurry, but they're in there. The top of the strut is all rusty too. That's bad. So now I got all three nuts off, and really it wasn't that bad. It was just a little bit tight. So back under the car, I'm just taking off this little clip that holds the brake line in place. That's a 12mm bolt. No big deal. Came out really easily. And now you have to pull this thing out. Try not to tweak the brake line too much, but again, not a big deal. I've heard this nut can be hard to get off. You're supposed to put a 6mm Allen wrench in there to hold the sway bar end link in place, but I'm going to try it without the Allen wrench and see what happens, and maybe I'll do that off camera. I guess I got lucky because I used this 15mm socket in my breaker bar, and this thing came off right away like it wasn't even tight. So now that the nut's off, I can pop the end link out of there. Did I just say end link? Sorry, I got a little surprised because the whole thing kind of collapsed on me. I probably should have loosened these bolts first, or at least left some of the nuts on the top to hold the strut in place, but let me see if I get lucky and if I can get those nuts loosened up, and I'll turn the camera back on afterwards. So the update is that that bottom bolt was really tough to get out, so I had to brace it on the other side with this 19mm wrench, but I eventually got it loose, and now I can take the whole strut out. So now with a little bit of finagling, I was able to get the top bolt out, and I'll get the bottom bolt out off camera. My apologies for doing all this stuff off camera. I know you guys like to see the whole thing, but I just don't have a lot of time to make videos. I barely have time to do this job at all, so I have to cut a few corners somewhere, and I think you get the idea of how to do this. So now I can somewhat gently take the old strut out, try not to damage anything, and we'll toss it down on the driveway. And you can see my shoe is just about as beat up as the strut. Thing's not really that bad, but I'll talk about that in a second. So I don't see any leakage coming from the strut cartridge. You know, that would be some wetness right around here, and I really don't see any. This wetness here is just from the WD-40 I sprayed earlier, The real reason that I'm replacing this whole thing is because the spring is so worn out that I can't carry heavy loads in the car without the car almost scraping on the ground, especially with the trailer hitch on there. So I decided to replace the whole thing with a quick strut so that I could get new springs and hopefully carry heavier loads. On my Cavalier, I went with KYB struts, but they didn't seem to be available for the Camry on rockauto.com. So I went with the Gabriel Alters because somebody on a message board somewhere said that the Moogs and the Monroes weren't that good. So we'll see how the Gabriels do. They're made in China, but I guess everything is nowadays. Let's get it out of the box and see how it looks. So here's the Gabriel next to the old strut, which I don't even know if it's original or not. Gabriel is plain black. It's kind of boring looking, but it's definitely new, and it looks a little beefier. I don't know if that's because the spring has a thicker coating or if it's just a heavier spring, but maybe they just went with the heavier springs so they wouldn't have to have a separate part number for the station wagon. I don't know, but hopefully this thing is going to do the job and keep the rear end of the car off the ground. So I threaded the needle and I got the new strut in, off camera, sorry. And one nut is holding it in place at the top. I'll put the other two nuts in and tighten those and then get down to the bottom again. Turns out the studs on the new strut are longer than the studs on the old strut, so I need to use a deep socket. The only one I have is a 1/4 inch, 12 millimeter, so I'm going to use that. The video is supposed to be full of action shots, but here's an in-action shot showing you just how tight everything is under there. Not a big deal though. I got them on. Back underneath the car, the hard part was getting these two bolts started, but now that they're in the holes, I'll tap them through and tighten up the nuts on the other side. I don't know the torque spec on these, but it's probably quite a bit, so that's what I'm going to put on. Quite a bit of torque. You'd probably be better off looking up the torque spec and using a torque wrench though. Now I guess I can just reinsert the sway bar end link in the hole and we'll put the nut on there. And I just checked the torque spec on this and it said tighten it but don't kill it. Finally I guess I can just push this brake line back in and put that bolt in and tighten that. And believe it or not, that little bolt was the trickiest part of the project because it just wouldn't line up right. I guess that's what you get with Chinese struts, but you know, look at the rest of this strut. It's pretty beefy. So I don't mind. The bolt's in and I think we're pretty much done. So there you have it, my new strut installed. That was a really pretty easy job with basic hand tools. Got tricky in a couple of spots, but no big deal. I'm going to install the other side now. I think you can figure out how to put your wheel back on and put your back seat back together if you tackle this job yourself. So I'll leave those parts out. And hopefully this new pair of struts will keep my car from dragging on the ground. And if not, I hope you learned something anyway. Thanks for watching.